we do. As Thomas Aquinas says, it's where they act. That's where their presence is. So when a curtain moves or an object moves in the house, the pure spirit is essential. Just as he could act on an object across the world at the same time, or right a second after, because it's not limited to physical space and time. And for that reason, they're said to be able to possess more than one person at the same time. So I talked to an expert to do this. And basically, he described it like this, that these entities are connected to people like a pipe. And they're able to send inputs into these people, influence them in some way with thoughts or with voices, and those are when they claim to be possessed. Pains in their body, they wake up in the morning, their arm is throbbing, half their body is numb. The next day, it's the other half of the body. They have terrible headaches, terrible stomach aches. They go to see several doctors, specialists, to take medicine. Nothing works. The medicine's never, And so the evil spirits are sending inputs, basically driving these people, these people away from God into a state of desperation, where ultimately they may do, the ultimate act of desperation, which is to take their own life. Spirits are sending these inputs. Occasionally they can come through this pipe and enter into the person and influence them in certain ways, but it isn't that the person doesn't have control over their actions. It's losing control. But when the evil spirit is said to come through, then the person will lose consciousness. I had one woman say she was telling me that she was at the house having dinner with her husband. They both knew that she had this problem and the blessing, and she woke up from her state on the bed, like fighting him off, and he was there panting, like what, and she was just, what happened? And he said, well, I basically said a blessing over the food, and you went into this trance, and she attacked him, and he finally got this relic, and then this evil spirit left her. Another incident, a TV show, and Pope John Paul II came on, and she began crying, and her husband was next to her, and he comforted her, and he said, don't worry, Pope John Paul II is in heaven, he's watching over us. And she turned to him, and she had this evil look on her face. That person is less able to then send those inputs through that pipe. So then the person feels more awake, more in control of their lives. They don't feel the presence of this evil spirit that's influencing them. And so over time, and he realizes that over time, it was the evil spirit that had come into her and was crying because he knew that Pope John Paul II. And the real for why that liberation happens is because it's up to the person. The person is praying again, is going back to church. Imagine if a person doesn't have this, and he goes through this process, and then he or she says, I'm good. Was helping her in this particular case. That I do. So the problem comes back. So the idea then is that these evil spirits influence people like through a pipe, but then they have to amend those behaviors that are said to have opened up the doorway. And so usually they go back to church, they begin praying, they practice the sacraments, they're Catholics, and that's how God comes into this whole process of turning evil to good.
We're talking with Matt Baglio about the book on which the movie The Rite was based. So in the case of demonic possession then and the exorcism having taken place and successfully sent out, then the person could still be vulnerable, even though now they've started to focus again on the church, that if they turn away from the church again, or if they just become neutral about their faith, that the demon will come back. That's
how God comes into this whole process of turning evil to good.
Very interesting. Again, we're talking with Matt Baglio about the book on which the movie The Rite was based. So, in the case of demonic taking place and successfully sent out, then the person could still be vulnerable to the return of the devil, even though now they've started to focus again on the church, that if they turn away from the church again, or if they just become neutral about that particular, that the demon will come back to them, what's the recidivism rate? Do they track how often that actually happens, that instead of moving on to somewhere else, like a house that, they come back to that house? Or what's the rate at which, that they are successful in keeping the demon out of the person completely forever?
Well, I mean, I don't think they keep track of those things. But, I mean, again, you have to think of the analogy of, imagine one demon connected to thousands of people by pipes. And so that one demon is able to influence all those people. It isn't that they have only one person and then they're gone. And again, there's more than one demon. In many of these cases, the person is possessed by more than one demon. That's an interesting concept. And I ask exorcists about that. How does that work? And there's always different names that are associated with demons, but I really learned that the names aren't as important as just having a name. And sometimes I get powerful ones than others. We can get into the hierarchy of evil spirits later. And the more powerful ones have these armies of spirits that sort of work for them. And in a sense, it's that powerful spirit sending these other spirits out to affect people. And so in some cases, a person is going and being liberated spirit, and that could happen very relatively easily, or maybe not right away, but over a shorter period of time. But then they're not completely out of the woods, so to speak, because there's other spirits that are there. And how you discern a more powerful spirits are able to stay away and not manifest themselves. They're the ones that when you pray the ritual, they don't come forward. A person could sit there and look and be absolutely normal and just have no signs at all, or they can go rigid. And so, people assume the case. Instead, it's quite the opposite. This is said to be a stronger demon, and they're able to hide, which means not manifest.
Okay, this is very helpful, and for a lot of people, this is their first introduction ever to the concept of demonic possession and exorcism beyond the way it's portrayed in Hollywood movies. Matt Baglio, The Rite, The Making of a Modern Exorcist. Coming up later on in the week, George Norrie actually will have somebody on talking about the occult, and they are an occultist. So maybe the same subject from a different side of the fence coming up later on next week on Coast to Coast. We'll get more with Matt coming up in just a minute. I want to get into the particular exorcism takes place, the steps as the priests go through it, both for the ones that are successful and then the ones that fail. Why do they fail? If they fail, coming up next on Coast to Coast, this is Ian Punnett.